My father gave me a ruined country house and my brother a luxury apartment in New York. When my mother saw the $6 million resort I had built from those ruins, she threw a legal document on my desk and said I had 12 hours to give the place back to them so my brother could take over. When my brother arrived in his oversized pickup truck, his face went completely dark at what he saw. My name is Kendra and I am 32 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. The slap of the leather folder against the court's reception desk echoed through the grand foyer of the Sterling Oaks. The sound was sharp enough to make my concierge flinch, but I did not blink. I stood behind the desk, calmly taking a microfiber cloth to wipe away a single drop of chamomile tea that had spilled from the impact. Standing opposite me was my mother, Yvette Sterling. At 58 years old, she still carried herself like royalty, dressed in a flawless emerald green St. John knit suit, her hair perfectly coiffed, her posture rigid with the authority she wielded over our family and the entire Atlanta high society. But we were not in Atlanta. We were in the Hudson Valley, standing in the middle of a $6 million eco-resort that I had built from the ground up. My mother tapped her manicured fingernail against the folder. "Sign it, Kendra," she demanded, her voice carrying that familiar tone of absolute command. "I need your signature on the transfer deed right now." I carefully folded the microfiber cloth and placed it under the counter. I looked at the legal document, then back up at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a second-class citizen in my own home. "Transfer deed," I repeated, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You drove all the way from the city just to hand me a piece of paper demanding I sign over my property." "It is not your property," she snapped, leaning closer. "It is Sterling family property. Your father left this estate to you because he knew it was a decaying pile of bricks. He thought it would give you a little project to keep you busy while your brother handled the real legacy in New York. But things have changed. Malik needs this land. He needs the collateral." I felt a cold smile touch the corners of my mouth. "Malik needs collateral because his Manhattan lifestyle is sinking him," I stated simply. "I know all about his financial troubles, Mother. You cannot hide a sinking ship forever, even in your elite social circles." My mother's eyes narrowed. "Do not speak about your brother that way. Malik is the future of the Sterling name. He is navigating a complex corporate restructuring, and he needs liquid assets. You have played hotel manager long enough. This little country bed and breakfast of yours is sitting on prime acreage. We are going to leverage it to secure Malik a bridge loan from the bank. You have exactly 12 hours to sign this deed over and vacate the premises so your brother can take over operations." 12 hours, I said, crossing my arms. "You walk into my resort, insult my life's work, and give me a 12-hour eviction notice on property that is legally in my name. If you do not sign it," my mother said, stepping back and raising her chin, "I will personally see to it that you are ruined. I sit on the board of every major foundation in our community. I will use my position to have your funding blacklisted across every Black elite social circle from here to Atlanta. I will make sure no investor, no vendor, and no high net worth client ever sets foot on this property again. You will be a pariah." The threat was meant to break me. In the past, the thought of being exiled from the community would have terrified me. But I was no longer the insecure girl seeking her mother's approval. I was a 32-year-old developer who had turned termite-infested ruins into a masterpiece. Before I could tell her exactly where she could shove her 12-hour ultimatum, a thunderous engine roar shattered the serene atmosphere of the resort. We both turned to look through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the lobby. Speeding straight into the VIP valet circle, scattering the pristine white gravel, was a heavily modified blacked-out Ford F-150 Raptor Luxury Edition. The truck came to a jarring halt, taking up 2 spaces reserved for executive guests. The door swung open and Malik stepped out. At 35, my brother still carried himself like the college sports star he used to be. He wore designer sunglasses, a custom-tailored blazer over a crisp white shirt, and an expression of pure arrogance. He slammed the truck door, expecting to walk into the dilapidated heritage home our father had left me 3 years ago. Instead, Malik froze. I watched through the glass as his entire demeanor shattered. He took off his sunglasses, his face going completely dark. He was not looking at a rotting colonial house. He was looking at state-of-the-art solar pavilions blending seamlessly into historic brickwork. He was looking at a fleet of Tesla charging stations lined up discreetly near the garden. He was looking at high-profile politicians and tech billionaires sipping champagne by a stunning infinity pool that cascaded toward the valley below. I walked out from behind the reception desk and pushed open the double glass doors, stepping out onto the portico with my mother right behind me. Malik was staring at a United States senator who was laughing with a prominent venture capitalist on the terrace. "What is this?" Malik demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of shock and raw jealousy. He marched up the stone steps, his eyes darting frantically across the immaculate landscaping and the luxury amenities. "What did you do to the property?" "I built an empire, Malik," I said calmly. "Welcome to the Sterling Oaks." Malik stopped a few feet away from me. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck standing out. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to assert his usual dominance. He pointed a finger at me. "You expect me to believe you built this? You. The girl who could not even get a corporate internship. Dad must have left you hidden funds. There is no way you financed this on your own." "Dad left me a collapsing roof and a warning about you," I replied smoothly. "Every brick, every solar panel, every client you see here is because of my sweat and my vision." Malik let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "It does not matter who built it. It is Sterling land. And as the man of this family, I am taking over. You are going to hand over the keys and the operational accounts today. I have real estate partners waiting in the city who can turn this place into a proper country club." "You do not have partners," Malik, I countered, taking a step closer to him. "You have creditors. You have sharks circling you because you do not know how to manage money. You drove up here in a $100,000 truck acting like a king, but I know the truth. You are broke." Malik lunged forward, but my mother immediately stepped between us, throwing her hands up to protect her golden child. She turned her fierce glare entirely on me. "Do not you dare speak to your brother that way," she snapped. The psychological warfare she had waged my entire life was back in full force. She looked at me with absolute disgust. "Your father only gave you this dirt patch out of pity, Kendra. He knew you did not have the sophistication to survive in New York like your brother. He gave Malik the Manhattan penthouse because Malik is the true heir to the Sterling legacy. You were just supposed to be the caretaker of the family ruins." I let out a slow, steady breath. The absolute audacity of her delusion was astounding. I looked right past her to my brother, who was sweating despite the cool morning air. "Pity," I repeated, my voice ringing out clearly across the portico. "Is that the story you tell yourself to sleep at night, Mother? Let us talk about that Manhattan penthouse. Dad gave Malik a $3 million property fully paid off. No mortgage. Free and clear." Malik opened his mouth to shout, but I cut him off, raising my voice just enough to ensure they both heard every single word. "And yet," I continued, "Malik still managed to face foreclosure. You took a paid-off penthouse and leveraged it to the absolute limit to fund your flashy lifestyle and your failing investment firm. You owe the banks millions, Malik. You lost the crown jewel of Dad's portfolio, and now you are up here trying to steal my success to cover your failures." My mother gasped, turning to look at Malik. Her golden child refused to meet her eyes, staring down at the pristine stone driveway instead. But before she could demand an explanation from him, the heavy passenger door of the black Raptor slowly clicked open. The heavy hinges of the luxury truck groaned slightly as the door swung wide. A sleek designer heel stepped onto the gravel, followed by a woman draped in an oversized Burberry trench coat. The crisp morning breeze caught her blonde hair as she stood up, adjusting her designer sunglasses. I recognized her immediately, and my blood boiled. It was Chloe, Malik's wife. She closed the door with a soft thud and began walking toward us, her heels crunching rhythmically on the driveway. The entire dynamic on the portico shifted the moment she arrived. Chloe came from old fading New England money, the kind of family that had a historic name but dwindling bank accounts, and she brought with her a suffocating level of entitlement that she weaponized daily. She climbed the stone steps standing shoulder to shoulder with Malik and my mother. She did not even offer a greeting. Instead, she let out a condescending sigh, looking around the resort with a critical eye before turning her gaze to me. "Kendra, you really need to be realistic about this situation," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that familiar patronizing tone she always used with me. "You have done a cute job fixing up the place, I will admit that. But let us be honest, a boutique eco-resort run by a single black woman with no corporate backing is never going to survive in the long term. Without my family's network, the wealthy white investors, and the old money establishment will never trust this place. You need us." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer arrogance of her words. She was standing on my property looking at the multi-million-dollar success I had built with my own two hands, and still trying to tell me I was inadequate without her. "You need to hand the operation over to Malik," Chloe continued, crossing her arms. "With my family's name endorsing the project, and Malik acting as the face of the business, we can bring in real capital. We will rebrand it. We will make it an exclusive multi-racial country club. If you fight us on this, you will just end up bankrupting yourself. We are actually doing you a favor." I could not help it. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the high brick walls of the grand foyer behind me. The sound made Chloe stiffen, her manufactured confidence wavering for a fraction of a second. "A favor," I echoed, taking a slow step toward her. "You think stealing my business to pay off your husband's massive debts is a favor? Let me ask you something, Chloe. Is this the same old money network that forced you to ban me from your wedding 5 years ago?" Chloe's face went rigid. My mother immediately tried to intervene, but I held up a hand, my eyes locked onto my sister-in-law. "Do not pretend you do not remember," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet register. 5 years ago, when you and Malik got married in that pretentious country club in Rhode Island, you told Malik I was not welcome. You said my aesthetic did not match your vision. You were terrified that your wealthy white relatives would judge you for having a sister-in-law who was struggling to build a business out of dirt and ruins. You thought I was an embarrassment. "That is ancient history," Chloe snapped, though a faint flush of red was creeping up her neck. "You are being overly emotional and completely unprofessional. We are talking about business here." "We are talking about hypocrisy," I corrected her. "You thought I was too country, too unrefined to sit at your dinner table. But now that I have built a $6 million resort that caters to people far wealthier than your fading family ever was, suddenly you want to be my business partner. Suddenly you want to put your name on my hard work." Malik stepped forward, trying to shield his wife. "Watch how you speak to her, Kendra. She is trying to help us save this family's legacy. You are being selfish." "I am being a CEO," I replied coldly. "And as the CEO of this estate, I am telling you that you have absolutely no power here. You do not have the money, you do not have the leverage, and you certainly do not have my permission to stand on my steps and dictate my future." Unable to intimidate me in private, Malik and Chloe decided to escalate the situation. They exchanged a quick, desperate look, and Malik suddenly pushed past me, storming through the double glass doors and into the grand lobby of the resort. Chloe followed right behind him, her heels clicking loudly against the polished floor. My mother trailed them, looking anxious but unwilling to stop her golden child from taking control. I turned and followed them inside, signaling my head of security with a subtle nod as I passed the reception desk. I did not want them thrown out just yet. I wanted them to dig their own grave in front of my high-net-worth clientele. Malik marched into the center of the VIP lounge, raising his voice so that every guest in the vicinity could hear him. "Where is the general manager?" he demanded loudly, waving his arms. "I want to see the operating licenses. I want to see the safety inspection reports right now. This place is a massive liability." Several guests, including a prominent tech CEO and a visiting diplomat, looked up from their morning coffee, frowning at the sudden disturbance. Chloe leaned against the concierge desk, loudly complaining to an attendant. "The service here is absolutely abysmal. This ghetto management style is exactly why this place is going to fail. We are going to have to fire everyone and start fresh when we take over." They were deliberately trying to cause a scene, attempting to sabotage the resort's reputation on the spot to force my hand. Malik glared at me from across the room, a smug, challenging look on his face. He thought that by threatening to cause a public scandal, I would panic and bow to his demands to keep the peace. He thought I was still the quiet, compliant sister who would do anything to avoid a family argument. He was dead wrong. I did not call security. I walked calmly over to the concierge desk and spoke quietly to my assistant. "Bring me the master reservation ledger," I instructed. She nodded and quickly retrieved a heavy leather-bound book from the safe beneath the counter, handing it to me. I carried the ledger to the center of the lounge, stopping just a few feet away from Malik and Chloe. The guests were watching closely now, sensing the tension. I slammed the heavy leather book down onto a marble coffee table. The loud thud made Chloe jump. "You want to see how this place is managed?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet lounge. "Let us look at the books." I flipped the ledger open to the current month, gesturing to the meticulously logged pages. I looked dead into Chloe's eyes. "This resort is completely booked for the next 24 months. We have waiting lists full of Silicon Valley innovators, international diplomats, and venture capitalists. Our minimum stay is $10,000 a weekend, and people are begging to pay it." I turned to Malik, my gaze icy. "You drove up here thinking you could intimidate me because you think I am weak. You think I need your wife's fading New England trust funds or your empty promises of corporate backing. Let me make this abundantly clear. I do not need your network. I own the people who own your family's banks." The silence in the lounge was absolute. The tech CEO sitting nearby raised his coffee mug slightly in my direction, a silent gesture of respect. Malik's face drained of color. The reality of my power and his complete lack of it finally began to sink in. The public humiliation was absolute. He had tried to assert his dominance in front of billionaires, and I had effortlessly proven that he was nothing more than a desperate broke man throwing a temper tantrum. Malik grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip tight. "We are leaving," he muttered, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. He practically dragged her toward the exit, refusing to look at the guests who were now openly staring at them. My mother hurried after them, her face flushed with embarrassment, completely silent for the first time all morning. They retreated to the parking lot, their grand takeover attempt shattered into a million pieces. But I knew this was not over. They were desperate, and desperate people always try to find a back door when the front door is slammed in their faces. Through the glass walls of the lobby, I watched Malik and Chloe scramble into the massive black Raptor. The truck did not start right away. They were sitting inside, their silhouettes animated with frantic gestures. They were panicking. Malik's phone was likely blowing up with collection notices from his Manhattan creditors, and my refusal to hand over the estate had backed him into a corner with no escape. In a frantic, desperate move, Malik pulled out his phone and dialed the Sterling family's corporate lawyer, a sleazy attorney who had always bent the rules to suit my mother's whims. I could imagine the conversation perfectly. They were searching for a loophole, a technicality, any legal mechanism they could use to rip my property away from me. And they found one. In the original documents of our late father's will, there was a specific obscure clause regarding the heritage property. Marcus Sterling had mandated that if the estate was not operating as a profitable commercial entity within exactly 3 years of his passing, ownership would revert to the family trust, which was entirely controlled by my mother, Yvette. Malik knew that I had only hosted my grand opening gala a month ago. In his panicked, greedy mind, he did the math. Tomorrow marked exactly 3 years since our father's death. He believed that because the resort had only been officially open to the public for a month, I had missed the 3-year deadline to establish a profitable commercial entity. He thought he had found the ultimate legal kill switch. I watched from my office window as the Raptor finally roared to life and sped out of the driveway, kicking up dust. My assistant rushed into my office, her face pale with worry. She had overheard my mother's 12-hour ultimatum earlier that morning. "Miss Sterling," she said nervously, "they are leaving, but your mother said she would be back to ruin you. What do we do?" I walked over to my desk and picked up a heavy gold pocket watch that had once belonged to my father. I ran my thumb over the engraved initials, feeling a deep, profound sense of calm wash over me. I looked up at my assistant and smiled. "Tell the kitchen to prepare an exceptional breakfast spread for tomorrow morning," I said, pouring myself a small glass of aged bourbon. Make sure the coffee is fresh and the pastries are perfect. She looked confused. Are we expecting VIP guests tomorrow morning? I took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the warmth settle in my chest. No, I replied softly. We are expecting a funeral. Let them come. I have been waiting 3 years for tomorrow. The heavy passenger door of the black truck clicked and swung open. A pair of designer heels stepped onto the pristine gravel, followed closely by my brother Malik's wife, Chloe. Draped in an oversized trench coat, she brought with her the suffocating entitlement of fading New England money. She removed her oversized sunglasses and surveyed the property with a forced, unimpressed gaze. Chloe came from a family that constantly boasted about their historical wealth, even though their bank accounts had been steadily drying up for a decade. She had always looked down on me, viewing my ambition as something common and unrefined. She walked up the stone steps to join Malik and my mother, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic of the confrontation. My mother, who usually demanded absolute authority, took a subtle step back, deferring to the illusion of prestige that Chloe represented. Kendra, let us be realistic about this situation, Chloe said. Her voice was laced with that familiar patronizing tone she always used whenever she addressed me. You have done a cute job fixing up this place. I will admit that much. But let us be honest with ourselves. A boutique resort run by a single black woman with no corporate backing is never going to survive in the long term. You lack the infrastructure. You lack the pedigree. Without my family network, the wealthy white investors and the old money establishment will never trust this place. They will not put their capital into a project managed by someone like you. I stared at her, absorbing the sheer arrogance radiating from her words. She was standing on my property, looking at the multi-million-dollar success I had built with my own 2 hands, and still trying to tell me I was inadequate without her conditional validation. You need to hand the operation over to Malik. Chloe continued, crossing her arms and looking around the courtyard as if she already owned it. With my family name endorsing the project, and Malik acting as the face of the business, we can bring in real capital. We will rebrand it completely. We will make it an exclusive multiracial country club. We can sanitize the image and make it palatable for the people who actually hold the purse strings in this state. If you fight us on this, you will just end up bankrupting yourself and embarrassing the family. We are actually doing you a favor by stepping in before you ruin everything. I could not help it. I let out a sharp, genuine laugh that echoed off the high brick walls of the grand foyer behind me. The sound made Chloe stiffen. Her manufactured confidence wavered for a fraction of a second. The idea that she viewed the hostile takeover of my life's work as a charitable act was almost comical. I took a slow, deliberate step toward her, closing the distance between us. A favor, I echoed, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. You think stealing my business to pay off your husband's massive debts is a favor? Let me ask you something, Chloe. Is this the exact same old money network that forced you to ban me from your wedding 5 years ago? Chloe's face went completely rigid. My mother immediately tried to intervene, opening her mouth to scold me, but I held up a hand, keeping my eyes locked dead onto my sister-in-law. Do not pretend you do not remember, I said, making sure my words cut through the cool morning air. 5 years ago, when you and Malik got married at that pretentious country club in Rhode Island, you told Malik I was not welcome to attend. You said my aesthetic did not match your vision for the ceremony. You were terrified that your wealthy relatives would judge you for having a sister-in-law who was struggling to build a business out of dirt and ruins. You thought I was a profound embarrassment to your perfect, curated image. You made sure I sat alone in a cheap apartment while you celebrated with the people you are now bragging about. That is ancient history, Chloe snapped, though a dark flush of red was rapidly creeping up her neck. You are being overly emotional and completely unprofessional. We are talking about business here, Kendra. Personal grievances have no place in high-level corporate restructuring. You need to look at the bigger picture and give Malik the keys before you make a fool of yourself. We are talking about pure hypocrisy, I corrected her, refusing to back down an inch. You thought I was too unrefined to sit at your dinner table back then. But now that I have built a $6 million resort that caters to people far wealthier than your fading family ever was, suddenly you want to be my business partner. Suddenly you want to slap your name on my hard work and claim the profits. You do not want to help me. You want to save yourselves from the financial ruin you two created. Malik stepped forward, trying to shield his wife from my words. Watch how you speak to her, Kendra. She is trying to help us save this family legacy. You are being entirely selfish by hoarding this property. I am being a chief executive officer, I replied coldly. And as the chief executive officer of this estate, I am telling you that you have absolutely no power here. You do not have the money, you do not have the leverage, and you certainly do not have my permission to stand on my front steps and dictate my future. Unable to intimidate me in private, Malik and Chloe exchanged a desperate, furious look. Realizing their condescension was entirely ineffective, they decided to escalate the situation dramatically. Malik suddenly pushed past me, storming through the double-glass doors and into the grand lobby of the resort. Chloe followed right behind him, her trench coat flaring as her heels clicked loudly against the polished hardwood floor. My mother trailed them, looking anxious but unwilling to stop her golden child from taking control. They were moving with purpose, determined to cause a scene so massive that I would be forced to capitulate just to protect my business. I turned and followed them inside. As I passed the reception desk, I caught the eye of my head of security. I gave him a subtle, dismissive nod, signaling him and his team to stand by but not intervene yet. I did not want Malik and Chloe thrown out immediately. I wanted them to dig their own grave in front of my high-net-worth clientele. I walked up the sweeping staircase to the mezzanine level, leaning against the mahogany railing to watch the disaster unfold from above. Malik marched straight into the center of the VIP lounge. The room was a masterpiece of architectural preservation, featuring exposed brick walls, plush velvet seating, and massive windows overlooking the valley. He raised his voice so that every single guest in the vicinity could hear him. "Where is the general manager?" Malik demanded loudly, waving his arms in a theatrical display of outrage. "I demand to speak to whoever is running this facility. I want to see the operating licenses. I want to see the safety inspection reports right now. This place is a massive liability to the public." Several guests, including a prominent technology executive from Silicon Valley and a visiting diplomat from Europe, looked up from their morning coffee and newspapers. They frowned at the sudden, jarring disturbance. The atmosphere of tranquil luxury I had cultivated was completely shattered by my brother's yelling. Chloe leaned aggressively against the concierge desk, loudly complaining to my terrified attendant. "The service here is absolutely abysmal," she declared, making sure her voice carried to the nearby tables. "This ghetto management style is exactly why this place is going to fail within the year. The standards are shockingly low. We are going to have to fire everyone and start fresh when we take over the property. I cannot believe they charge these rates for such an incompetent experience." They were deliberately trying to cause a catastrophic scene. They were attempting to sabotage the resort's reputation on the spot, hoping that the wealthy guests would pack their bags and demand refunds. Malik glared up at me from across the room, a smug and challenging look plastered on his face. He thought that by threatening to cause a public scandal, I would panic. He assumed I would rush down the stairs, beg them to be quiet, and bow to his demands just to keep the peace and protect my fragile new business. He thought I was still the quiet, compliant little sister who would do absolutely anything to avoid a family argument. He was entirely wrong. I stood on the mezzanine, completely unbothered, slowly sipping a fresh cup of coffee a waiter had quietly handed me. I watched my mother pace nervously near the entrance, clearly torn between her obsession with public appearances and her blind loyalty to Malik. She hated public scenes, but she wanted the resort for him so badly that she allowed the chaos to continue. "This behavior is entirely unacceptable," Malik continued shouting, pointing at the chandeliers. "The structural integrity of this building is questionable at best. Who authorized these renovations? We need to shut down operations immediately pending a full family review." The technology executive at the corner table set down his tablet and crossed his arms, staring at Malik with clear disgust. The diplomat whispered something to his security detail, looking deeply annoyed by the interruption to his morning peace. I let the moment stretch. I let the uncomfortable silence fill the spaces between Malik's shouting. I wanted every guest in that room to see exactly who Malik and Chloe were: desperate, loud, and entirely out of their depth. They were not powerful figures taking control of a business. They were a drowning couple throwing a tantrum because they had lost control of their own lives. When I was absolutely certain that they had exhausted their limited vocabulary of insults, and when the tension in the room had reached its absolute peak, I finally decided it was time to end the performance. I set my coffee cup down on the railing. I did not call security to drag them out. I did not yell back. I simply prepared to show them exactly what kind of empire they were trying to mess with. I descended the grand staircase slowly, letting the rhythmic sound of my heels command the attention of the room. The chaos Malik had tried to instigate fizzled out as I approached the ground floor. I bypassed my brother completely and walked calmly over to the concierge desk. I spoke quietly to my assistant, who was still trembling slightly from Chloe's verbal assault. "Bring me the master reservation ledger," I instructed her. She nodded eagerly, relieved to have clear instructions, and quickly retrieved a heavy leather-bound book from the primary safe beneath the counter. She handed it to me with both hands. I took the ledger and carried it to the exact center of the lounge, stopping just a few feet away from Malik and Chloe. The guests were watching with intense fascination, now sensing that the dynamic of the room was about to shift dramatically. I held the heavy leather book for a moment before dropping it directly onto the solid marble coffee table between us. The loud, heavy thud echoed through the lounge, making Chloe visibly jump backward. "You want to see how this place is managed?" I said, my voice carrying with absolute clarity across the quiet room. "You want to discuss my lack of corporate backing and my supposedly failing business model? Let us look at the actual books." I flipped the heavy ledger open to the current month, gesturing forcefully to the meticulously logged pages of reservations, deposits, and corporate retreats. I kept my gaze locked onto Chloe, ensuring she could not look away from the reality of my success. "This resort is completely booked for the next 24 months, I stated, each word precise and undeniable. "We have waiting lists full of Silicon Valley innovators, international diplomats, and venture capitalists. Our minimum required stay is $10,000 a weekend, and these people are begging me for the privilege to pay it. We do not discount. We do not negotiate. We offer an exclusive experience that your social circles could never replicate." I turned my icy gaze to Malik, watching his bravado melt away into sheer panic. "You drove up here thinking you could intimidate me because you genuinely believe I am weak. You think I desperately need your wife's fading New England trust funds or your empty, fraudulent promises of corporate backing to survive. You thought you could walk into my house and scare away my clients." I took one step closer, invading their space, projecting a level of power I had spent years cultivating in the shadows while they squandered their privileges. "Let me make this abundantly, undeniably clear for both of you. I do not need your network. I do not need your validation. And I definitely do not need your failing family name. I own the people who own your family's banks." The silence in the lounge was absolute and profound. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The prominent technology executive sitting at the corner table slowly raised his coffee mug slightly in my direction, offering a silent, respectful salute to a fellow chief executive handling business. The public humiliation was total and devastating. Malik's face completely drained of color, his skin turning a sickly shade of gray, as the reality of my power finally sank in. He had tried to assert his dominance in front of billionaires, and I had effortlessly proven that he was nothing more than a desperate, financially ruined man throwing a childish temper tantrum. His entire worldview, built on the false premise that he was the superior sibling, collapsed in front of an audience of the most powerful people in the country. Chloe looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Her arrogant facade was completely gone, replaced by the panicked realization that she had just insulted a woman who held vastly more power than she could ever comprehend. She looked at Malik silently, demanding that he fix the situation, but Malik had absolutely nothing left to say. He was utterly defeated. Malik grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip tight and frantic. "We are leaving," he muttered, his voice shaking violently with suppressed rage and embarrassment. He practically dragged her toward the main exit, refusing to make eye contact with any of the guests, who were now openly staring at them with undisguised pity and disdain. My mother hurried after them, her face flushed with deep embarrassment. She was completely silent for the first time all morning, unable to defend the spectacular failure of her golden child. The three of them retreated through the glass doors and back out to the parking lot, their grand aggressive takeover attempt shattered into a million irreversible pieces. I stood in the center of my lounge, surrounded by my loyal staff and respectful guests watching them run away. I had won the battle, but I knew the war was far from over. The heavy passenger doors of the black truck clicked shut with a solid thud, sealing my brother and his wife inside a soundproof tomb of their own making. The plush leather interior of the luxury vehicle, which they usually treated as a symbol of their manufactured wealth and undeniable superiority, now felt like a suffocating cage pressing in on them from all sides. Malik gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white against the dark leather. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths, as the public humiliation he had just suffered in the VIP lounge continued to burn through his veins like battery acid. But the real terror was not the embarrassment of being outsmarted by his younger sister. The real terror was vibrating right inside the pocket of his custom-tailored suit. His smartphone lit up the darkened cabin of the truck, casting a pale, sickly glow across his sweating face. A relentless barrage of automated collection notices flashed across the high-definition screen in rapid, terrifying succession. First Capital Bank, Manhattan Trust. Private equity firms and predatory lenders he had successfully dodged for 6 months were now simultaneously initiating aggressive recovery protocols. They were coming for everything he had left. Chloe stared at the glowing screen, her perfectly applied makeup entirely unable to hide the sheer panic contorting her features. The illusion of her old money security was evaporating in real time. She turned on him, her voice shrill and desperate, demanding to know how he let this catastrophic financial failure happen. She screamed that her fading family name would be dragged through the mud and absolutely ruined when the foreclosure of their $3 million penthouse hit the New York Society papers tomorrow morning. She threatened to leave him packing her bags the second they returned to the city. Malik ignored her frantic yelling. He was drowning in his own hubris, desperate for a lifeline. He ripped the phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking so badly he could barely unlock the screen, and dialed a number he had prayed he would never have to use for something this dire. The call connected to Arthur, the Sterling family corporate lawyer. Arthur was a morally bankrupt attorney who had spent 2 decades cleaning up my mother's messes and exploiting dark legal loopholes to keep the family trust intact. Malik did not bother with pleasantries. He screamed at Arthur through the truck speaker system, demanding that the lawyer find a way to break my ironclad deed. He ordered Arthur to find a zoning violation, a tax error, absolutely anything that could force me to hand over the resort before the bank seized his Manhattan assets. Arthur listened to the frantic screaming with cold, practiced silence. When Malik finally ran out of breath, Arthur reminded him that my deed was completely legitimate, registered and untouchable by standard corporate litigation. The silence in the truck cabin grew heavy and absolute, broken only by Chloe's quiet, terrified sobbing in the passenger seat. But then Arthur let out a slow, calculated breath over the phone. A moment of sinister realization crept into the lawyer's voice. Arthur brought up the original exhaustive drafting of our father Marcus Sterling's last will and testament. Arthur reminded Malik that our father had always been a man of brutal, unforgiving conditions when it came to his investments. Arthur's voice crackled over the Bluetooth speakers, taking Malik back to the dark wood-paneled office on the day the will was originally read. Arthur began to recite the exact phrasing of a deeply buried clause that everyone, apparently even me, had entirely forgotten in the chaos of the estate transfer. The lawyer quoted the document word for word. If the heritage property is not operating as a profitable commercial entity, within exactly 3 years of Marcus Sterling's passing, ownership reverts entirely and immediately back to the primary family trust. Arthur explained that this clause was designed to prevent the property from sitting abandoned and bleeding tax money, ensuring it would either be successful or return to my mother's absolute control. Malik's eyes widened as the legal jargon washed over him. The sheer panic in his chest was suddenly replaced by a massive, overwhelming surge of adrenaline. He began to do the mental math out loud, his voice trembling with a new dark energy. He counted the months, the weeks, the exact days since our father suffered his fatal heart attack. He turned to Chloe, a manic, desperate smile breaking across his face, completely transforming his features from a defeated man into a predator who had just found a loaded weapon. Tomorrow, Malik said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Tomorrow marks exactly 3 years since his death, and Kendra only hosted her grand opening gala a month ago. Malik let out a loud, unhinged laugh that bounced off the windows of the truck cabin. He genuinely believed that I had spent 2 years and 11 months purely renovating the property burning through my capital to restore the brickwork without officially registering a single commercial transaction. He believed that because my public relations campaign and high society launch party only happened 30 days ago, I had catastrophically missed the 3-year deadline established by our father. He believed I was operating on borrowed time and had entirely forgotten the trapdoor built into my own deed. The despair in the truck completely vanished, replaced instantly by toxic, triumphant greed as they prepared to execute their final strike. Malik threw the massive truck into gear and sped aggressively down the winding mountain road to rendezvous with our mother. Yvette had driven ahead to a private country club located halfway between my resort and the city limits. She was sitting alone at a secluded table on the terrace, aggressively stirring a cocktail, still absolutely fuming from the severe embarrassment of being ousted from my lobby in front of global billionaires. Malik burst onto the terrace with Chloe trailing closely behind him. He did not bother sitting down. He threw his phone directly onto the center of the patio table with Arthur still on speakerphone, demanding that the lawyer repeat his incredible discovery for our mother to hear. Yvette listened in stunned silence as Arthur slowly explained the 3-year commercial profitability clause hidden deep within the estate documents. As the implications of the legal loophole washed over her, Yvette's posture instantly straightened. The defeated, humiliated woman from the lobby vanished completely, and the ruthless matriarch reclaimed her throne. She let out a sharp, victorious laugh that startled the waiters passing by. She immediately began praising Malik for his supposed brilliance, completely ignoring the fact that it was the lawyer who had actually found the loophole. The trio spent the next hour meticulously planning my absolute destruction over expensive drinks. They discussed the logistics with terrifying joy. Yvette ordered Arthur to draft the seizure documents immediately, demanding they be ready by midnight. She spoke animatedly about how she would redecorate my private office, detailing exactly how she would strip my name from the front gates and replace it with Malik's holding company logo. Chloe chimed in excitedly, suggesting they hire a commercial moving truck to arrive at the exact same time as the lawyers, wanting the visual satisfaction of seeing my belongings thrown into cardboard boxes. They discussed bringing a top-level bank representative to immediately secure my commercial assets, freeze my operational accounts, and transfer the resort's immense cash flow directly to Malik to satisfy his Manhattan creditors, the very second the clock struck 8 in the morning. They reveled in the toxic fantasy of seeing me stripped of my power, envisioning me walking down the long gravel driveway with nothing but a single suitcase and my shattered pride. Meanwhile, the perspective shifted sharply back to the serene, powerful atmosphere of the Sterling Oaks. The sun was beginning to set over the horizon, casting a brilliant golden hue over the Hudson Valley and bathing my resort in warm light. I was sitting behind the massive, custom-built oak desk in my private executive suite. The room was a sanctuary of quiet authority, featuring dark walls, modern art, and sweeping views of the property I had poured my soul into. I was not looking at financial reports or construction documents. I was holding a heavy gold pocket watch that had once belonged to my father. My thumb slowly traced the engraved initials on the casing, feeling the weight of the history and the silent promises between us. The heavy wooden door to my office suddenly swung open, interrupting the quiet moment. My executive assistant rushed into the room, clutching a digital clipboard tightly to her chest. The young woman was visibly terrified, her voice shaking uncontrollably as she reminded me of the 12-hour ultimatum my mother had issued that morning in the lobby. The assistant frantically mentioned the rumors she had heard spreading among the resort staff. She talked about the threats of being blacklisted from high society, the fear that the resort would be seized by a bank by morning, and the possibility that everyone would lose their jobs. She begged me to call a team of defense attorneys to file an injunction to do absolutely anything to protect the business we had all worked so hard to launch. I did not panic. I did not reach for my desk phone to call my legal team. I did not show a single ounce of fear. I simply smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that immediately stopped my assistant's frantic rambling. I set the gold pocket watch gently down on the polished wood of my desk, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my leather blotter. I walked over to the small crystal decanter sitting on my side table and poured myself a glass of aged bourbon. The amber liquid caught the last fading rays of the setting sun glowing brightly in the quiet room. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich heat of the drink center my focus. I looked at my terrified assistant and spoke with absolute, unshakable certainty. I told her to cancel every single one of my morning meetings. I instructed her to coordinate with the head of our security team to ensure the front gates were left wide open at dawn. I told her to have the kitchen staff brew the most expensive, freshly ground coffee they had in the pantry and set up a reception table in the grand hall. My assistant stared at me completely bewildered by my lack of defensive action and asked why we were preparing a reception for people who were coming to destroy us. I took another sip of my drink, my voice echoing with years of suppressed endurance and ultimate triumph. "Let them come," I said, my gaze fixed firmly on the darkening horizon outside my window. "I have been waiting 3 years for tomorrow." The 12-hour deadline officially expired. The morning sun rose brilliantly over the sterling oaks, bathing the historic brickwork and the modern solar pavilions in a crisp, golden light. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning. The atmosphere inside the grand hall of the resort was a masterclass in psychological warfare. It was perfectly serene, yet electrically charged with a heavy, undeniable anticipation. Soft classical music played smoothly through the hidden acoustic sound system built into the vaulted ceilings. The rich scent of fresh espresso and warm artisan pastries filled the air, creating an environment of absolute unbothered luxury. The business of catering to the global elite was proceeding exactly as normal, completely unaffected by the looming threat of a hostile family takeover. I stood in the absolute center of the grand foyer waiting. I had entirely abandoned the casual, understated elegance I wore the previous day. Today I was dressed for a corporate slaughter. I wore a masterfully tailored emerald green suit that fit my frame like custom armor. The color was highly deliberate, projecting immense wealth, absolute power, and an untouchable level of authority. My hair was pulled back sharply into a flawless style, leaving my face entirely exposed and completely devoid of any fear or hesitation. I wore a pair of diamond stud earrings my father had given me for my college graduation, a silent nod to the true legacy I was about to protect. I gathered my senior management team and the head of my security detail for a final, precise briefing. I stood before them with perfect posture and told them exactly what was about to happen in the next 10 minutes. I ordered my security personnel to maintain absolute professionalism and to stand completely down. I explicitly instructed them not to intervene physically unless I gave a direct verbal command. I told my concierge desk to subtly guide our high-net-worth guests away from the main entrance and into the private dining pavilions to keep them out of the immediate crossfire. I wanted the intruders to walk straight into the center of the room without any resistance. I wanted this highly orchestrated trap to snap shut, in full view of everyone, allowing my family to expose their toxic greed with zero interference from my staff, through the massive soundproof glass walls of the lobby. I watched the horizon line at the edge of the property. The absolute peace of the morning was violently broken by the arrival of a hostile, aggressive caravan. It was a ridiculous, over-the-top display of desperation disguised as power. Leading the pack, tearing up the pristine driveway and kicking gravel into the manicured lawns, was Malik's massive black Ford Raptor. He parked it diagonally across the drop-off zone, intentionally blocking the pathway for any arriving guests. Right behind his truck, was a sleek, rented black town car carrying my mother and Arthur, the sleazy corporate lawyer who thought he had outsmarted me. And behind them, bringing up the rear, in a staggering display of supreme arrogance and cruelty, was a massive commercial moving truck followed by a dark sedan carrying a high-level representative from the bank. The visual contrast between the two worlds was breathtaking and cinematic. Inside the glass walls, I stood like a queen in a peaceful, thriving empire that I had built with my own blood, sweat, and unmatched intellect. My staff moved with quiet dignity, the architecture soared above us, and the financial stability of my enterprise radiated from every polished surface. Outside, my biological family arrived like a pack of chaotic scavengers, driven entirely by sheer desperation, impending financial ruin, and a deeply toxic sense of entitlement. They were marching onto my property to steal my success because they lacked the discipline to create their own. I watched as the doors of the vehicles swung open simultaneously. Malik stepped out first, adjusting his suit jacket with a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. Chloe emerged next, holding a designer clipboard, as if she were already the property manager preparing to take inventory of my belongings. My mother stepped out of the town car, flanked by her lawyer, looking up at the grand facade of the resort, with eyes full of undisguised greed. The bank representative exited his sedan carrying a thick leather briefcase that undoubtedly held the foreclosure documents Malik had promised him. The drivers of the moving truck opened the rear cargo doors, preparing to physically remove me from the premises. They gathered at the base of the grand stone steps, moving as a unified front of destruction. They believed they held all the cards. They believed the 3-year clause had handed them the keys to my kingdom. They believed they were about to walk inside, hand me a single piece of paper, and watch me crumble into tears as they stripped me of my legacy, my wealth, and my pride. The heavy glass doors of the resort stood between these two colliding realities, ready to open and ignite the violent climax of a war that had been brewing silently in our family for an entire lifetime. I took one final calming breath, smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit, and waited for them to cross the threshold into my domain. The heavy double doors of the sterling oak slid open with a soft mechanical hum, but the group that marched through them brought the subtlety of a wrecking ball. They did not walk into my resort, they invaded it. My mother led the vanguard, her chin tipped upward at an angle designed to force everyone else to look down. She clutched a designer handbag, like a royal scepter, sweeping her gaze across the vaulted ceilings and the reclaimed brickwork with an expression of absolute, unearned ownership. Beside her walked Malik, practically vibrating with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and greed. He had unbuttoned his suit jacket, thrusting his chest forward as he surveyed the grand foyer. Chloe marched a half-step behind him, tightly gripping her leather clipboard, her eyes darting around the room, evaluating my masterpiece, not for its beauty, but for how quickly she could liquidate it. Arthur, the family attorney, and the nameless bank representative brought up the rear, clutching thick leather briefcases filled with the fraudulent paperwork they believed would end my reign. I stood dead center in the foyer, my emerald green suit functioning as armor. I did not move a single muscle. I watched them cross the threshold, their footsteps echoing aggressively against the polished hardwood floors. My mother did not offer a greeting. She stopped 5 feet away from me, inhaled deeply, and threw her arms open in a grandiose gesture that demanded the attention of every single person in the room. This estate is now under the exclusive jurisdiction of the Sterling Family Trust. Yvette announced, her voice booming across the lobby. She spoke not to me but to the entire room, ensuring the few high-net-worth guests enjoying their morning coffee could hear her. All operations are suspended immediately. Management is changing hands today. Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her proclamation, Chloe broke away from the group and marched directly toward the reception desk. My concierge, a brilliant young woman named Sarah, stiffened as Chloe slammed her clipboard down onto the quartz counter. Chloe did not look at Sarah as a human being. She looked at her as an obstacle. "Listen to me very carefully," Chloe barked, pointing a manicured finger at my staff. "Your employment is currently under severe review. This entire facility is being restructured by real professionals. I want the master keys, the employee rosters, and the current guest manifest printed out and handed to me in the next 5 minutes. If any of you attempt to contact outside authorities or tamper with the computer systems, my husband will see to it that you never work in the hospitality industry again. Do you understand me? Sarah looked past Chloe, making direct eye contact with me. I gave Sarah a slow, subtle shake of my head. Do nothing. Say nothing. Sarah immediately lowered her gaze, folding her hands neatly in front of her, and completely ignored Chloe's demands. Chloe's face flushed with immediate rage at the blatant defiance, but before she could escalate her screaming, Malik took center stage. Malik strutted toward me, closing the distance until he was standing close enough for me to smell the expensive, overpowering cologne he used to mask his insecurities. He reached inside his tailored jacket, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents wrapped in a heavy rubber band, and tossed them callously onto the marble table beside me. The papers hit the stone surface with a heavy final smack. "Pack your bags," little sister Malik said, a deeply arrogant smirk twisting his features. "The game is officially over. You played real estate agent for a while, and I will admit you polished up this dump better than I expected. But the adults are taking over now. You missed the 3-year deadline, Kendra. Dad's will explicitly stated this property reverts to the trust if it is not a profitable commercial entity by today. You opened a month ago. You failed. Now grab whatever cheap clothes you have in your office and get off my property before I have security throw you out." I looked down at the eviction papers resting on the marble table, then back up at my brother's triumphant face. I did not reach for the documents. I did not defend my business. I simply locked eyes with him and allowed the absolute silence of the room to stretch out. My refusal to react threw a wrench into their carefully choreographed power play. They expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for a compromise. My total chilling silence created a vacuum in the room, and my mother, unable to stand, the quiet rushed in to fill it. Yvette noticed the tech CEO and a prominent politician sitting in the adjacent lounge area, watching the spectacle with raised eyebrows. Instantly, she pivoted her strategy. If intimidation was not working on me, she would use the audience. She shifted her posture, dropping the aggressive dictator persona and seamlessly adopting the role of a burdened, loving matriarch who was simply trying to save her family from public embarrassment. "It breaks my heart that it had to come to this," Yvette said loudly, pressing a hand to her chest. She looked toward the guests, ensuring her performance was landing. "I have tried so hard to protect my daughter. I really have. But Kendra has always been prone to delusions of grandeur. She took her father's charitable gift and squandered it on this failing vanity project. As a mother, I cannot stand by and watch her bankrupt herself and drag the sterling name through the mud of the Black community. I have a responsibility to our legacy. I am stepping in to rescue her from her own incompetence. It is tough love, but it is necessary." "Chloe never one to miss an opportunity to demean me," chimed in right on cue. Her voice dripped with poisonous faux sympathy. "We are not completely heartless, Kendra. We know you put a lot of manual labor into digging up the weeds and fixing the brickwork. When Malik and I rebrand this place into a proper high society country club, we will still need people to handle the manual labor. Since you are so good at playing in the dirt, I am willing to offer you a minimum wage job as a groundskeeper. You can stay in the staff quarters out back. It is a generous offer considering the financial mess you have made." I remained dead silent. I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I stood like a statue carved from emerald and ice, letting them exhaust every single ounce of their toxic superiority. I wanted them to empty their entire arsenal of insults. I wanted them to feel the absolute peak of their manufactured victory. The longer I stayed quiet, the more they exposed their true, ugly nature to the room. They were digging a hole so deep that they would never be able to climb out of it, and I was more than happy to hand them the shovels. The silence began to gnaw at Malik's nerves. His smirk faltered, replaced by a twitching annoyance. He hated my calm. He hated that I was not giving him the hysterical, defeated reaction he desperately needed to validate his fragile ego. The lack of resistance did not make him feel powerful. It made him feel ignored. And Malik Sterling could not stand being ignored. He stepped aggressively into my personal space, closing the gap until he was towering over me, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me where his words had failed. His face darkened, the veins in his neck bulging as his temper flared. "Are you deaf?" Malik snarled, his voice dropping the performative volume and turning into a vicious, menacing growl. "I said the game is over. Stop standing there looking at me like you hold any cards. You have nothing. I want the master keys to the server rooms. I want the combination to the financial safes in the back office. And I want the administrative passwords to the booking system right now. If you do not hand them over in the next 60 seconds, I will personally kick down the door to your office and rip the servers out of the wall myself." Arthur, the family lawyer, sensed that Malik was on the verge of doing something highly illegal and physically destructive in front of witnesses. He quickly stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on Malik's arm and clearing his throat to regain control of the narrative. Arthur adjusted his tie and adopted his most condescending professional legal voice. "There is no need for any hostility, Miss Sterling," Arthur said smoothly, pulling a crisp document from his briefcase. "The law is entirely on our side. The 3-year reversion clause has been triggered due to your lack of commercial operation. As the legal representative of the Sterling Family Trust, I am formally executing the transfer of this estate." Arthur then gestured to the nervous-looking man in the gray suit standing behind him. "Allow me to formally introduce Mr. Reynolds, a senior representative from Manhattan Trust Bank. Mr. Reynolds is here to immediately transition the physical and liquid assets of this property into a holding company controlled by your brother. This transition will collateralize Malik's outstanding debts in Manhattan and satisfy his creditors. The bank has already prepared the seizure notices. The transition is happening today, whether you cooperate or not." The tension in the grand hall became utterly suffocating. The air felt thick-heavy with the weight of the impending destruction. My concierge staff held their breath, their eyes darting between me and the hostile invaders taking over the lobby. Malik stood with his chest puffed out, a triumphant sneer returning to his lips, utterly convinced that Arthur's legal jargon had finally backed me into a corner I could not escape. Chloe tapped her pen against her clipboard, ready to start crossing my name off of my own legacy. Yvette watched me with cold, calculating eyes, waiting for the exact moment my spirit would finally break. The bank representative slowly unlatched his briefcase, the metallic click echoing loudly in the silent room, ready to pull out the paperwork that would sign my empire away. I looked at Malik, I looked at Chloe, I looked at my mother, and then I finally took a breath to speak. The profound silence stretching across the grand hall was a living, breathing entity. I let it linger, letting the sheer weight of their monumental arrogance settle over the room. I looked into my mother's cold eyes, finding absolutely no trace of maternal warmth, only a ravenous hunger for control. I shifted my gaze to Chloe, whose smug expression was perfectly plastered on her face, and finally to Malik, my brother, a man so hollow he had to try to tear down my empire just to fill the void of his own failures. I placed both of my hands flat on the smooth marble surface of the reception desk. When I finally spoke, my voice was chillingly calm. It did not shake. It did not rise in anger. It cut through the heavy air of the lobby with the precision of a surgical scalpel. "I am going to offer you one final, devastating chance," I said, making sure every syllable landed heavily between us. "If you turn around, walk out of those double glass doors right now, and drive back to the city, you can keep your pride. You can go back to your country clubs and pretend you are still the untouchable Sterling family. But if you force me to open the laptop sitting behind this desk, none of you will ever recover. You will leave here with absolutely nothing." For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine hesitation crossed Malik's face. He knew me well enough to recognize that I did not make empty threats. But his toxic pride, fueled by his desperate financial ruin and his wife's suffocating expectations, quickly overrode his common sense. My mother was the first to break the tension. Yvette let out a sharp theatrical scoff that echoed off the high brick walls. She shook her head, looking at the bank representative and the lawyer as if to apologize for my supposed delusion. "Listen to her," Yvette declared, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. She is cornered bankrupt and facing the total loss of her vanity project, and she is still trying to play the dictator. This is exactly why your father should never have left you anything, Kendra. You have absolutely no business acumen, and now you are resorting to childish bluffs to delay the inevitable. We are not leaving. We are here to reclaim our legacy. Chloe laughed out loud, a harsh grating sound that drew annoyed glances from the high-net-worth guests observing from the lounge. She adjusted her Burberry coat and stepped closer to the desk, her eyes alight with malicious joy. You really are pathetic, Kendra, Chloe sneered, leaning over the marble counter. Do you honestly think anyone here is intimidated by you? You are a failed real estate agent standing in a sinking ship. We brought the top corporate attorney in the state and a senior representative from Manhattan Trust Bank. They have the seizure documents in their hands. You do not have a magical laptop that can rewrite property law or magically generate corporate funding. Stop embarrassing yourself in front of these people and hand over the master keys before we have you arrested for trespassing on Malik's property. The sheer audacity of her words hung in the air, but I did not break eye contact. I stood completely still, letting her revel in her false victory. Malik could no longer contain his volatile impatience. The veins in his forehead throbbed dangerously. He slammed his closed fist violently onto the marble desk, the sharp crack of flesh against stone causing my concierge to jump back in fear. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, his composure completely shattered by his desperate need for money. "I am done playing these games with you," Malik yelled, his voice cracking with rage. "I am the head of this family. I am the primary beneficiary of the Sterling estate. You are nothing but a squatter who missed her legal deadline." Malik spun around, gesturing aggressively toward the bank representative, who was still standing near the entrance with his leather briefcase. "Do your job," Malik commanded the man, spraying saliva as he shouted. "Open that briefcase, serve her the foreclosure and seizure notices, and initiate the immediate transfer of all operational assets to my holding company. I want her accounts frozen right this second. Seize the resort." I looked at the three of them, perfectly capturing the image of their twisted, greedy faces in my mind for the very last time. I slowly reached under the counter, retrieving my sleek silver laptop, and placed it deliberately on the marble surface. I opened the screen, the bright glow illuminating my face. I nodded slowly, my eyes cold and entirely devoid of mercy. "Do not say I did not warn you." I completely bypassed my brother. I did not look at him. I did not address his screaming, and I absolutely did not acknowledge his fabricated authority. Instead, I shifted my focus entirely to the man in the gray suit standing behind the family lawyer. I looked directly at the senior representative from Manhattan Trust Bank, bypassing the chaotic noise of my biological family to speak the true language of power. "David," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through Malik's frantic yelling. The sound of the bank representative's first name coming from my mouth acted like a physical shockwave in the grand hall. Arthur, the sleazy family lawyer, suddenly stopped organizing his paperwork. Yvette's triumphant smile froze instantly. Chloe blinked, her arrogant posture faltering as she looked back and forth between me and the banker. David Reynolds, a man who managed billions of dollars in commercial debt for one of the most powerful financial institutions in the country, immediately stopped unlatching his heavy leather briefcase. He looked up at me, his posture instantly straightening into a stance of absolute terrified respect. He did not look at me like I was a failed developer being evicted. He looked at me like I was his boss. "Yes, Miss Sterling," David responded, his voice remarkably polite and deferential, completely devoid of the aggressive authority a banker usually brought to a foreclosure. Malik was paralyzed. He looked at David, then at me, his brain completely unable to process why the bank representative he had brought to destroy me was addressing me with such profound reverence. "David," I continued, smoothly resting my hands on the open laptop, "could you please do me a favor? Could you please read aloud the exact name and the primary target of the asset seizure order you brought with you today? I want to ensure my family fully understands the legal and financial reality of what is happening in this lobby." Malik's face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He stepped toward the banker, waving his arms erratically. "What are you doing?" Malik yelled, his voice pitching higher with sudden terror. "Why are you answering to her? She is the target. I brought you here to seize her property. Read the damn papers and freeze her accounts. Seize the resort right now." David Reynolds did not move to open the briefcase. He did not pull out any eviction notices for the Sterling Oaks. Instead, he took a very slow, agonizing step away from my brother. The bank representative looked at Malik, and the color completely drained from David's face, leaving him pale and deeply uncomfortable. He clutched the handle of his briefcase with both hands, bracing himself for the explosion he knew was about to happen. "Mr. Sterling," David said, his voice dropping to a somber clinical register that carried clearly across the silent lobby. "I am not here for your sister. I am here for you." The dynamic of the room shattered instantly, breaking into a million jagged pieces of irreversible truth. The sheer magnitude of those 10 words hit my family like a freight train moving at full speed. Malik froze entirely. The air rushed out of his lungs, leaving him gasping silently, like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. His arms dropped limply to his sides. The aggressive, domineering aura he had projected for the last 20 minutes vanished, replaced immediately by the hollow, hollow-eyed stare of a man looking directly into the abyss of his own absolute ruin. Chloe staggered backward, her expensive designer heels catching on the hardwood floor as she physically recoiled from the banker's statement. Her mouth hung open in an undignified display of pure horror. She looked at the banker, then at Malik, her brain short-circuiting as the illusion of her old money security evaporated into thin air. The realization that the man she had married was not a powerful conqueror, but the actual target of the bank's wrath, broke her completely. My mother's jaw literally dropped. The rigid, regal posture Yvette had maintained for my entire life collapsed in an instant. She gripped the edge of the marble desk to keep her balance, her knuckles turning white. She stared at David Reynolds as if he had just spoken in an alien language. She could not comprehend how her carefully laid trap, the flawless legal ambush she had planned with her golden child, had somehow turned its jaws entirely onto them. The profound silence returned, but this time it belonged entirely to me. I had warned them. I had given them a chance to walk away with their pride intact. They chose to press forward, blinded by their greed and their relentless need to see me fail. Now, standing in the heart of my multi-million-dollar empire, they were finally going to learn the true cost of underestimating the daughter they had discarded. I reached out and tapped a single command on my laptop keyboard. Instantly, the ambient classical music faded into complete silence. Behind the reception desk, a massive, interactive digital display board, usually reserved for welcoming corporate retreats, illuminated the grand hall. I connected my screen with a swift keystroke, projecting my desktop for everyone to see. I turned my attention to Arthur, who was still clutching his leather briefcase like a shield. "You thought you found a brilliant loophole, Arthur. You scoured our father's will looking for any technicality to strip me of my inheritance, and you thought you struck gold with the 3-year profitability clause. You convinced my brother and my mother that because I only hosted my grand opening gala 30 days ago, I had failed to establish a commercial entity within the legal timeframe. You came here today to enforce a reversion to the family trust." I pressed another key. A high-resolution scan of a commercial operating license filled the massive screen. It bore the official seal of the state of New York, and the date of registration was highlighted in bright yellow. The date was exactly 48 hours after our father's death certificate was signed. "You thought I spent the last 3 years just planting flowers and painting walls?" I said, projecting my voice so it carried to the high vaulted ceilings. "I registered this estate as a profitable commercial historical site on day 2 of owning it. I did not need a hotel permit to generate revenue immediately. I partnered with an elite university program and leased the surrounding 200 acres of untouched woodland to high-end botanical researchers." Chloe let out a shaky breath, her eyes darting across the projected legal jargon. Her entire premise that I desperately needed her old money network to secure corporate backing was crumbling before her eyes. I had secured elite institutional partnerships while she was still picking out floral arrangements for her country club luncheons. I brought up the next slide showing staggering tax revenue documents and federal preservation grants. They paid me a massive premium for exclusive access to the heritage soil and rare indigenous plant species. That initial lease generated enough immediate profit to entirely fund the first phase of my architectural renovations without me ever having to take out a single predatory bank loan. I secured historical landmark tax credits that effectively doubled my operating budget by year one. The 3-year reversion clause you banked your entire hostile takeover on was legally and irrevocably voided 1,000 days ago. The color rapidly drained from Arthur's face. As an attorney who specialized in manipulating corporate law, he knew exactly what he was looking at. The documents on the screen were flawless, heavily fortified by federal tax codes, and impossible to contest. He realized in a matter of seconds that if he attempted to execute the fraudulent seizure documents currently sitting in his briefcase, he would not just be laughed out of a courtroom. He would be immediately disbarred and prosecuted for criminal fraud by the state attorney general. Arthur swallowed hard, avoiding my mother's furious gaze, and quietly took 3 deliberate steps backward, edging closer to the exit door. His cowardly retreat was the ultimate confirmation of their defeat. Malik refused to accept reality. He stepped forward, pointing wildly at the digital display, his voice cracking with desperate denial. "That is a complete lie. That is a fabricated technicality. You cannot run a luxury resort and an agricultural research facility on the same zoning permit. You are faking these documents to stall the bank. You are just trying to buy yourself time because you know you are broke." I did not even bother validating his delusion with a direct response. I simply maximized the final document on the screen. It was a formal certification from the state Supreme Court, validating the absolute sovereignty of the Sterling Oaks Operating Trust under my exclusive control. There were no loopholes left to exploit. There was no back door. The legal grenade had detonated, and it had completely obliterated the foundation of their entire scheme. My mother stared at the glowing screen, her chest heaving as she struggled to comprehend how thoroughly she had been outplayed. She had walked in here expecting to easily conquer a naive little girl playing hotel manager. She expected me to cry and beg for a seat at her table so she could generously offer me crumbs from my own plate. Instead, she found herself standing in the command center of a financial strategist who had anticipated her treachery 3 years in advance. I had built an impenetrable fortress while they were busy polishing a crumbling crown. "You played checkers, Yvette," I said, using her first name to entirely strip her of her maternal authority. "I played chess. You spent 3 years waiting for me to fail so you could swoop in and steal the scraps to feed your golden child. But I spent those 3 years building a legal and financial wall so high that you could never climb over it. The estate is mine, the business is mine, and your highly anticipated legal takeover just died on the launchpad in front of half the local elite." The complete and utter destruction of their legal strategy hung heavily in the room. They had nothing left to threaten me with. No eviction notices, no trust fund loopholes, no leverage whatsoever. The high-net-worth guests in the lobby were now watching them, not with curiosity, but with absolute disdain, treating them like common trespassers who had overstayed their welcome. But the true horror of their situation had not even fully materialized yet. Because while they were busy mourning the loss of my property, they had completely forgotten why the bank representative was standing in the lobby in the first place. I turned my gaze away from the shattered remnants of their legal strategy and looked directly at the man in the gray suit. David Reynolds remained perfectly still during Arthur's humiliating retreat, clutching his briefcase with a white-knuckled grip. My family was so consumed by the loss of my property that they had entirely forgotten why David was standing in my lobby. Malik was still breathing heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He looked at the banker, his expression morphing into a twisted mask of desperate hope. Malik straightened his ruined posture and pointed a shaking finger at David. He demanded that the banker execute a contingency plan. In Malik's delusional mind, The bank was an independent ally that would simply restructure his loans against future earnings. He shouted that the 3-year clause did not matter, instructing David to freeze my accounts based on his authority. David did not move. He did not open his briefcase. He looked at me, waiting for my explicit permission to speak. I gave him a single brief nod. I stepped back to my laptop and cleared the screen, closing the files that had just destroyed Arthur's career. I opened a new, highly encrypted financial terminal. The massive digital display board behind the reception desk flared back to life. I projected a complex, deeply detailed network of corporate spreadsheets, bank transfers, and foreclosure notices. The numbers on the screen were staggering, highlighted in glaring, unavoidable red ink. I looked at my brother, letting my voice drop to a deadly conversational volume. "You drove up here today believing you were going to refinance your Manhattan debt," I said, making sure every syllable pierced the silence. "You thought you could use my successful eco-resort to collateralize your sinking lifestyle. But you have been lying to everyone in this room, Malik. You have been lying to your mother. You have been lying to your wife. And most importantly, you have been lying to yourself." I tapped the keyboard, expanding a specific financial summary for everyone to see. The bold red numbers stretched across the digital board. $2.5 million. "You are not simply cash poor, Malik," I continued, my voice echoing off the high brick walls. "You have been defaulting on $2.5 million in maxed out lines of credit and toxic predatory loans. You leveraged your Manhattan penthouse to the absolute limit to fund a fake billionaire lifestyle. You bought designer cars you could not afford. You financed lavish country club memberships on borrowed money, and you sank the rest into a failing investment firm that never generated a single dime of actual profit. You are a walking financial contagion, and Wall Street knows it." Chloe gasped, stumbling backward as her eyes scanned the catastrophic numbers on the screen. The reality of her husband's deceit hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had married him for his supposed wealth, and now she was staring at the undeniable proof that she was legally tethered to a bankrupt fraud. She turned to Malik, her face contorted with absolute rage, demanding to know if the numbers were real. Malik stared at the floor, his body trembling as his facade evaporated. I moved to the next phase of their destruction. I pulled up the corporate structure of Manhattan Trust Bank, the institution David Reynolds represented. The screen displayed a complex web of financial holding companies. When a client becomes a catastrophic risk, banks do not keep their debt. I explained, walking slowly toward my brother. They bundle those toxic loans and sell them off for pennies on the dollar to aggressive private equity firms. 6 months ago, Manhattan Trust purged you from their system. They packaged your $2.5 million liability and sold it on the open market to a private equity group called Obsidian Holdings. Malik swallowed hard. He tried to muster a pathetic shred of arrogance, claiming he could simply negotiate a new payment plan with Obsidian Holdings. He insisted private equity firms always settled for less, and that our mother would liquidate her personal assets to bail him out. Yvette nodded vigorously, frantically, promising that the family trust would cover the Obsidian debt to protect the sterling name. I let a cold, predatory smile spread across my face. I turned back to the laptop and executed the final fatal command. The screen shifted one last time, bypassing the public corporate registry and logging directly into the secure encrypted administrative portal of Obsidian Holdings. The digital display board illuminated the executive ownership structure of the private equity firm. There were no board members. There were no silent partners. There was only one name listed as the absolute sole controlling owner of Obsidian Holdings: Kendra Sterling. The air was instantly sucked out of the grand hall. Malik's knees visibly buckled. He swayed on his feet, reaching out to grab a velvet armchair just to keep himself from collapsing onto the hardwood floor. Chloe began to hyperventilate, taking quick, panicked breaths as she realized the full magnitude of the trap they had walked into. Yvette let out a low, strangled sound, her hands trembling as she stared at my name glowing in bright white letters on the board. I walked directly up to Malik, stopping mere inches from his face. He was sweating profusely, his eyes wide with a terror so pure it was beautiful to witness. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet, crushing authority of an executioner delivering the final blow. I am the shadow owner of Obsidian Holdings, I said, ensuring he heard nothing but the absolute certainty of his demise. I bought your bad debt for pennies on the dollar. I own your loans. I own the mortgage on your penthouse. I own the credit lines that funded your fake life. I am your only creditor. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, you are in absolute default. As if synchronized to the exact syllable of my final sentence, the deep guttural roar of heavy industrial diesel engines shattered the shocked silence of the grand hall. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the lobby, amber warning lights began to strobe and flash, casting harsh yellow reflections across the polished marble floors and the terrified faces of my family. Two massive, heavy-duty repossession tow trucks pulled aggressively into the pristine valet circle. They did not move with the polite caution of resort delivery vehicles. They moved with the ruthless mechanical efficiency of predators coming to collect a carcass. Malik whipped his head toward the windows, his eyes widening in pure horror. The first tow truck, a hulking beast of scarred metal and hydraulic winches, backed up swiftly toward his prized, custom-modified black Ford F-150 Raptor. The second truck angled sharply, aligning its massive steel forks perfectly with the bumper of the pristine white Range Rover Autobiography that Chloe had driven up just behind Malik. The sight of the industrial machinery closing in on their ultimate status symbols broke the spell of paralysis that had gripped the room. Chloe let out an ear-piercing, unhinged shriek that echoed violently against the vaulted ceilings. She dropped her designer clipboard. The expensive leather binder slapped against the hardwood floor, sending her meticulously printed takeover documents scattering uselessly across the lobby. "My car!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. "What are they doing to my car? Malik, do something right now!" Malik did not answer her. He sprinted blindly toward the exit, nearly tripping over the scattered papers in his desperation. The automatic glass door slid open, letting in the crisp morning air, laced with the heavy, acrid smell of diesel exhaust. Chloe ran right on his heels, her Burberry trench coat flying wildly behind her, all pretenses of high society elegance completely abandoned. My mother remained frozen in the lobby, her hands covering her mouth, absolutely incapable of processing the sheer violence of the financial slaughter happening right in front of her. I walked slowly toward the glass doors, stopping right at the threshold. I stood with perfect posture, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, allowing the cool breeze to wash over my emerald green suit. I watched the chaos unfold in my driveway, like a general surveying a battlefield after a decisive, flawless victory. Out on the gravel, Malik charged at the driver of the first tow truck. He was waving his arms frantically, his face twisted in desperate rage. "Get away from my truck!" Malik roared, his voice cracking. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a Sterling. You cannot touch this vehicle. I will sue you and your entire company into bankruptcy. Put those hydraulics down right now." The repo driver, a burly man wearing a stained high-visibility vest, did not even blink. He continued chewing his gum, completely unfazed by Malik's performance. He had dealt with fake billionaires throwing temper tantrums in affluent neighborhoods 100 times before. He simply reached out, pulled a heavy steel lever, and the hydraulic lift engaged with a loud mechanical whine. The metal fork slid effortlessly underneath the front tires of the massive black Raptor. "I said stop!" Malik screamed, physically stepping forward as if he were going to fight the truck itself. "You need to step back from the machinery, sir," the driver said in a bored, monotone voice, "or I will have the local sheriff cite you for interfering with a lawful repossession. If you have a problem, take it up with the bank." Malik spun around his chest, heaving, looking frantically for Arthur, his sleazy corporate lawyer. But Arthur was nowhere to be found. The attorney had quietly slipped out a side door the moment I exposed my ownership of Obsidian Holdings, abandoning his sinking clients to save his own legal license. Instead, David Reynolds, the senior representative from Manhattan Trust Bank, walked calmly down the stone steps of the resort. He carried his thick leather briefcase, but he was no longer acting as a weapon against me. He was acting on my behalf. David approached Malik and Chloe, his face a mask of absolute clinical professionalism. David popped the latches on his briefcase. The sharp metal clicks cut through the sound of the idling diesel engines. He reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of heavily stamped legal documents. He did not hand them to Malik with respect. He shoved them directly into Malik's chest, forcing my brother to grab them or let them fall to the dirt. "Mr. Sterling," David said, projecting his voice clearly over the noise of the tow trucks. "You have been served. Those are the formal notices of absolute default, immediate foreclosure, and asset repossession from Obsidian Holdings. As of this exact minute, your Manhattan penthouse is legally seized. Your commercial credit lines are permanently frozen. Your personal banking accounts have been locked to satisfy outstanding judgments. Furthermore, the vehicles currently being secured by these recovery agents are officially property of the holding company. You are ordered to relinquish all keys immediately." Malik stared at the thick stack of papers in his hands, his eyes darting frantically across the red stamps and the bold, unforgiving legal text. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. The illusion of his entire life, the fake wealth, the manufactured status, the unearned arrogance, collapsed into a pile of worthless paper in his trembling hands. Chloe, who had been screaming at the second tow truck driver to release her Range Rover, suddenly whipped around. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was now a tangled mess around her face. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely unhinged. She stomped across the gravel toward Malik, her designer heels sinking into the dirt. "What does he mean the penthouse is seized?" Chloe shrieked, her voice vibrating with pure, unadulterated panic. "Malik, what is this man talking about? You told me the Manhattan property was fully paid off. You told me my name was secured on the deed. You told me we were just leveraging a small country asset to expand the portfolio. What did you do?" Malik took a step back from his wife, looking like a cornered animal. "Chloe, just calm down," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "I can fix this. I just need to make a few calls. The market has been tough and I had to move some assets around to cover the margins. It is a temporary liquidity issue." "A temporary liquidity issue?" Chloe screamed, her face turning a violent shade of red. She slapped the stack of foreclosure papers right out of Malik's hands. The documents scattered across the driveway, fluttering into the dirt beneath the massive tires of the repo trucks. "That man just said my car is property of a holding company. Your sister just proved she owns our entire lives. You lied to me. You promised me financial security. You promised me that the Sterling name carried weight in New York. You are nothing but a fraud." Chloe's aristocratic facade completely shattered. The polite, condescending woman who had tried to offer me a groundskeeping job mere minutes ago was now screaming obscenities in my driveway like a deranged stranger. She pointed a shaking finger at Malik's chest, jabbing him aggressively. "I drained my own trust fund to keep your failing firm afloat last year, because you swore the returns were guaranteed," Chloe yelled, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. "You maxed out 3 different platinum credit cards in my name. You told me this eco-resort was a guaranteed multi-million-dollar bailout. You dragged me out to the middle of nowhere to humiliate me in front of billionaires, and now I do not even have a car to drive home in." "I am trying to provide for us," Malik yelled back, his own temper finally snapping under the intense public pressure. "Do not stand there and act like a victim, Chloe. You spent $500,000 last year alone on country club fees, designer clothes, and vacations we could not afford just so you could impress your washed-up broke family in New England. You pushed me to maintain this lifestyle. You demanded the penthouse. You demanded the Range Rover. I drowned myself in debt trying to keep you happy. You are a pathetic excuse for a man." Chloe spat back, tears of pure rage ruining her expensive makeup. "My family warned me about you. They told me you were just a flashy, arrogant athlete playing business with daddy's money. I should have listened to them. You have absolutely nothing. You are nothing. I am calling a car, and I am calling a divorce attorney the second I get back to the city. I am going to take whatever pathetic scraps you have left." As the tow truck hydraulics whined, lifting the sleek white Range Rover completely off the ground, Chloe turned her back on her husband. She pulled out her phone, sobbing hysterically, as she frantically tried to secure a private car service to rescue her from the nightmare she had helped create. Malik stood entirely alone in the center of the driveway. He watched his prized, heavily modified Raptor get hoisted into the air and secured to the back of the massive yellow repo truck. The heavy steel chains clanked loudly as they were locked into place, binding the tires tight. The sound was the final definitive nail in the coffin of his manufactured empire. I remained standing perfectly still on the threshold of my grand lobby, bathed in the morning sunlight. I watched the toxic parasitic marriage implode spectacularly right in the dirt where it belonged. They had tried to bring war to my doorstep, fully intending to strip me of my dignity, my business, and my future. Instead, they had completely annihilated themselves. I looked past the wreckage of Malik and Chloe and caught the eye of my mother, who was still standing inside the lobby, trembling uncontrollably as she watched her golden child lose everything he had ever touched. The matriarch who had ruled our family through fear and manipulation was now utterly powerless, forced to witness the absolute destruction of the son she had wrongly chosen to champion. And I had not even delivered the final blow yet. I turned my back on the glass doors and let them slide shut, cleanly cutting off the shrill, frantic sounds of Chloe screaming at the tow truck drivers in the driveway. The heavy soundproofing of the resort immediately plunged the grand foyer back into a state of pristine cathedral-like quiet. I took a slow, deep breath of the espresso-scented air and walked back toward the center of the room. My mother was still standing near the reception desk. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking so violently that her heavy diamond rings rattled against each other. The aristocratic, untouchable matriarch of the Sterling family was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, fragile woman who had just watched her entire manufactured reality evaporate into the morning air. David Reynolds, the senior bank representative, quietly closed his leather briefcase. He had delivered his financial execution orders and had absolutely no desire to remain in the crossfire of our family war. He looked at me, offered a sharp, respectful nod of his head, and swiftly walked out a side exit, leaving my mother completely isolated. Yvette finally tore her eyes away from the disastrous scene outside the windows and looked at me. Her face was a mask of pure devastation and denial. She pointed a trembling finger at my chest, her voice cracking as she struggled to find her words. "You set him up," Yvette gasped, her breathing ragged. "You laid a trap for your own brother. You bought his debt just so you could publicly destroy him and humiliate this family. How could you be so utterly ruthless?" "I did not set him up, Mother," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of any sympathy. "I did not force Malik to take out predatory loans to buy luxury cars he could not afford. I did not force him to leverage his fully paid-off penthouse to impress a woman who only loved his bank account. I simply stopped funding his delusions. You shielded him from the consequences of his actions for his entire life, and I just handed him the bill." Yvette shook her head, frantically stepping backward as if my words were physically striking her. "Your father would be sickened by this," she cried out, attempting to use her ultimate weapon one last time. "Marcus gave Malik that penthouse because Malik was the future of this family. He was the chosen heir. Your father gave you this ruined dirt patch because he pitied you. He knew you were not capable of handling real wealth. If Marcus were alive to see you stealing your brother's legacy, he would disown you himself." I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still, letting her desperate, venomous lies hang in the air between us. For 32 years, I had listened to that exact narrative. For 32 years, my mother had twisted my father's memory to elevate her golden child and keep me permanently suppressed. But I was not the scared, insecure girl she used to bully. I was the architect of my own empire, and it was finally time to burn her toxic mythology to the ground. "You have always loved speaking for Dad," I said softly, walking back around the reception desk and placing my hands on the keyboard of my laptop. "You controlled the narrative from the moment his heart stopped beating. You told the lawyers, the church, and the entire high society community that Malik was the rightful king and I was the unfortunate afterthought. But you were wrong, Mother. Dad never pitied me. And he certainly never believed in Malik." I tapped a sequence of keys, closing the financial ledgers, and opening a highly encrypted password-protected video file that the estate attorney had quietly handed me on the day the will was finalized. The massive digital display board behind the desk flickered, going entirely black for a fraction of a second. "I want you to hear it directly from him," I said, locking my eyes onto my mother's terrified face. The screen illuminated brightly, projecting a crystal-clear video recording across the grand hall. The high-net-worth guests who were still lingering in the lounge immediately turned their attention to the display. On the screen sat my father, Marcus Sterling. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk in his private study, wearing his favorite charcoal suit. He looked tired, his face lined with the illness that would soon take his life, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, and undeniably brilliant. Yvette let out a choked, breathless gasp. She covered her mouth with both hands, stumbling backward until her shoulders hit one of the velvet armchairs in the lobby. She stared up at the massive projection of her late husband, completely paralyzed by the sudden ghostly presence filling the room. The video began to play, my father's deep, authoritative voice echoing through the acoustic sound system of the resort. "If this video is being played," my father stated to the camera, his tone completely uncompromising, "it means the 3-year commercial deadline has officially expired. It means my daughter Kendra has successfully triggered the failsafe in her deed. And it means the Sterling Family Trust has attempted a hostile takeover of her property." My mother's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated horror. She realized instantly that this was not a generic goodbye message. This was a tactical strike orchestrated from beyond the grave. For years, my father continued on the screen, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his desk. "I have watched my wife Yvette enable our son's worst instincts. I have watched Malik grow into a man who loves the appearance of wealth, but possesses absolutely none of the discipline, the intellect, or the work ethic required to maintain it. He is a hollow vessel driven purely by arrogance and a deeply unearned sense of entitlement." Yvette let out a quiet sob, shaking her head as she was forced to listen to her husband systematically dismantle the golden child she worshipped. "I gave Malik the Manhattan penthouse for one simple, undeniable reason," my father said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "I knew his sheer arrogance would bankrupt him within 3 years. A fool with a fully paid-off luxury asset will immediately leverage it to buy toys he cannot afford. I handed Malik enough rope to hang his own financial credibility. I did this because it was the only legal way to permanently detach his toxic debts from the core Sterling estate before he could drag the entire family into ruin. I did not give him a legacy. I gave him a quarantine zone." The absolute brutality of the truth hit my mother like a physical strike. The penthouse was never a crown. It was a ticking time bomb, and her favorite son had walked right into the trap exactly as his father had predicted. My father paused on the screen, his expression softening slightly as he looked directly into the camera lens. And to my daughter Kendra, he said, his voice filling with a profound, unwavering respect, "I gave you the ruins in the Hudson Valley. Your mother likely told you I did it out of pity, but the truth is, I gave you the ruins because you are the only Sterling with the brilliance, the grit, and the fire to build a true empire. A finished building requires a mere caretaker. Ruins require a visionary. I knew you would take those broken bricks, that rotting wood, and forge a kingdom that your mother and brother could never ever touch." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I stood tall, absorbing the validation I had waited my entire life to hear. "I wrote the 3-year commercial clause into the deed for a very specific reason," my father concluded, his tone hardening once more. "I knew your mother would try to steal the land the second she realized its true value. I needed you to move faster than her greed. I needed to force you to become ruthless, to become untouchable. I gave you the dirt, Kendra, because I knew you were the only one strong enough to grow a fortune from it. You are the true heir to the Sterling legacy. Build your empire, my daughter, and never let them take a single brick." The screen faded to black, leaving the grand hall in a heavy, ringing silence. I looked at my mother. She had collapsed into the velvet armchair, her immaculate posture completely broken. She was weeping openly now, her chest heaving, as the foundation of her entire reality crumbled into dust. She could not claim the video was a deepfake. She could not claim it was taken out of context. She recognized his office, his exact cadence, and the brutal strategic genius that had built their original wealth. She was forced to sit there and absorb the undeniable reality that her husband had played her perfectly. He had known exactly who she was. He had known exactly who Malik was. He had weaponized their own greed to protect me, setting a massive, elaborate trap that they had blindly walked into. Yvette looked up at me, her makeup completely ruined by her tears. She looked at the polished marble floors, the soaring brick walls, and the quiet, respectful staff standing behind me. She finally saw the empire my father had envisioned, and she realized she had absolutely no place in it. The daughter she had abused, neglected, and ridiculed for 32 years was the true mastermind fully endorsed by the patriarch she claimed to speak for. The truth was absolute, and it had completely broken her. The massive digital display board went completely dark, casting a stark, glossy reflection of the lobby across its surface. The finality of my father's message settled over the grand hall like a heavy velvet curtain. Yvette sat paralyzed in the plush armchair. Her chest heaved with erratic, desperate breaths. The flawless aristocratic armor she had worn for decades was entirely shattered, leaving behind a frantic, aging woman who had just watched her entire universe flip upside down. She looked at her trembling hands, then at the empty space where the projection had been, and finally up at me. I watched the exact moment her survival instincts kicked in. The domineering matriarch who had marched into my resort barking orders was dead. In her place, a master manipulator desperately trying to change tactics emerged. She reached up with shaking fingers and wiped the tears from her cheeks, smearing her expensive waterproof mascara across her cheekbones. She took a shuddering breath and forced her face into a mask of profound, manufactured sorrow. "Kendra, my sweet girl." Yvette whispered, her voice trembling with a terrifyingly convincing vulnerability. "You have to understand. Your father was a harsh man. He was cruel to both of us in his own way. He set us up to fight each other. He wanted us to tear this family apart for his own sick amusement. We cannot let him win. We are family. We are all we have left in this world." I did not move. I looked down at her, my face a mask of absolute impenetrable ice. She was actually trying to spin my father's protective genius into a narrative of shared victimhood. She was attempting to rewrite the reality of the last 32 years in real time, banking on the hope that I was still the desperate daughter, craving her mother's affection. "I was just trying to protect you this morning," Yvette pleaded, leaning forward and reaching her hands out toward me, silently begging me to take them. "I was testing you, Kendra. I needed to know if you had the fortitude to defend your business against the sharks in this industry. I played the villain so you could prove your strength. And you did, my beautiful girl. You proved you are every bit the brilliant, ruthless woman I raised you to be. I am so incredibly proud of you." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of her lie was staggering. I kept my hands firmly clasped behind my back, refusing to offer her even an inch of physical comfort. "Are you genuinely trying to convince me that bringing a fraudulent lawyer, a bank representative, and a commercial moving truck to evict me was an exercise in maternal tough love?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly across the marble floor. "You did not come here to test my strength. You came here to steal my crown and hand it to a man who just lost his own. You came here to throw me out into the street." Yvette's hands dropped to her lap. The psychological manipulation had failed spectacularly, and the sheer terror of her reality finally set in. The walls were closing in on her pristine, carefully curated life. Malik was bankrupt. Chloe was filing for divorce and taking whatever scraps of dignity he had left. The Manhattan penthouse was gone. The luxury cars were currently being towed down the highway. The Sterling family name, her most prized possession, was about to be dragged through the mud of every elite social circle on the East Coast. She slid forward, slipping off the edge of the velvet armchair until she was practically kneeling on the polished hardwood floor. Her expensive Chanel skirt pooled around her knees. All pretenses of dignity vanished. She was no longer a society queen. She was a beggar at the gates of my empire. "Kendra, please," Yvette begged, her voice rising in sheer, undisguised panic. "You cannot do this. You cannot let your brother go bankrupt." Do you have any idea what will happen to our reputation? The foundation boards will strip me of my titles. The country club will revoke our memberships. We will be the laughingstock of the entire Black elite community from New York to Atlanta. They will absolutely destroy us in the social pages. She reached out and blindly grabbed the hem of my suit jacket. You have the money! She cried, tears streaming down her face and dripping onto the collar of her silk blouse. You own Obsidian Holdings. You can wipe his debt clean with a single phone call. You can restructure the loans. Just sign over a fraction of the profits from this resort to cover the margins. I am begging you as your mother. Pay off the loans. Save your brother. Save this family's face in the community. We will never bother you again, I swear it. Just do not let us fall into ruin. I stared down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like I was nothing. I watched her weep, completely stripped of her power, begging for a financial bailout to protect a social image built entirely on vanity and lies. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse. I thought about the countless times she had prioritized Malik's comfort over my basic survival. I thought about the sneer on her face when she handed me a 12-hour eviction notice just moments ago. I felt absolutely nothing, no pity, no guilt, no residual yearning for her maternal love. My heart was a fortress, and she was locked securely outside of the gates. I calmly reached down and peeled her trembling fingers off the fabric of my emerald green suit. I took one slow, deliberate step back, putting a definitive physical boundary between us. I looked down into her tear-streaked face, ensuring she felt the absolute crushing weight of my final judgment. You did not care about family when you gave me exactly 12 hours to vacate my own property, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Quiet, Register. You did not care about the sterling reputation when you threatened to have my funding blacklisted and my business ruined just to feed his ego. Yvette opened her mouth to protest, to offer another pathetic excuse, but the sheer coldness in my eyes silenced her instantly. You made your choice, Yvette. I continued, stripping away the title of mother permanently. You looked at the two children you raised, and you deliberately backed a loser. You sacrificed me on the altar of his vanity for 32 years. You funded his delusions, you celebrated his mediocrity, and you plotted to steal my hard work to cover up his spectacular failures. I stood tall, letting the ambient light of the grand foyer catch the diamond studs in my ears, the only piece of the sterling legacy I had ever accepted. Now you get to live with him, I said, delivering the ultimate sentence. You get to support a bankrupt, jobless man with no assets and no wife. You get to explain to your country club friends why your golden child is living in your guest bedroom. You backed a loser. Now you get to reap the exact rewards of your investment. The reality of my words washed over her, suffocating the last remaining spark of hope in her chest. She realized with absolute clarity that there would be no rescue, no secret family bailout, and no mercy. She was entirely on her own, chained to the anchor of Malik's catastrophic debt. Yvette covered her face with her hands and let out a long, hollow sob that echoed pitifully through the vast expanse of the lobby. I did not offer her a tissue. I did not offer her a hand to help her up from the floor. I simply turned my back on her and walked away. The heavy glass doors of the lobby slid open one final time, but it was not another frantic family member or a predatory lawyer crossing the threshold. The steady, authoritative crunch of boots on the hardwood floor announced the arrival of Sheriff Denise Carter. Denise was a formidable black woman in her early 50s, radiating absolute, unwavering command in her tailored uniform. She was not just the top law enforcement officer in the county, she was a close personal friend and a frequent VIP client who routinely booked the private spa pavilions at the Sterling Oaks to escape the high-pressure demands of her jurisdiction. Denise walked directly past my weeping mother without offering a single glance of recognition or sympathy. She stopped right beside me, resting a hand casually on her utility belt. "Good morning, Kendra." Denise said, her voice warm and entirely unbothered by the dramatic weeping occurring on the floor. "Your head of security gave my dispatch a call. I understand we have some unauthorized individuals refusing to vacate the commercial premises." I offered Denise a genuine, relaxed smile. Good morning, Denise. Yes, it seems my biological relatives mistook my luxury resort for a public shelter. Their visiting privileges have been permanently revoked. I need them escorted off the property immediately. Yvette scrambled to her feet, her silk blouse wrinkled and her immaculate hair in complete disarray. She saw the sheriff and immediately attempted to deploy her old society tactics automatically, assuming that a local law enforcement officer would bow to the Sterling family name. Denise, thank God you are here, Yvette cried out, rushing forward and attempting to grab the sheriff's arm. You know who I am. You know my family in the city. My daughter has completely lost her mind. She is trying to steal our assets and illegally evict us from our own estate. You need to arrest her for corporate fraud right now. Sheriff Carter did not flinch. She simply took a deliberate step back, forcing my mother's trembling hands to drop empty to her sides. Denise looked at Yvette with the cold, clinical detachment of an officer addressing a delusional vagrant. Mrs. Sterling. Denise said, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth. I know exactly who you are, and more importantly, I know exactly who owns the ground you are currently standing on. I have personally reviewed the commercial permits for this estate during routine municipal audits. You have absolutely no legal standing here. You are currently trespassing on private commercial property. You have exactly 2 minutes to start walking down that driveway, or I will put you in handcuffs and book you into the county jail for criminal trespassing and public disturbance. The threat of being paraded in handcuffs and a bright orange jumpsuit finally shattered the last remaining delusion in Yvette's mind. The absolute horror of a public mugshot hitting the local news feeds was the only thing that could force her to move. She clamped her mouth shut, letting out a stifled, humiliated sob, and began to shuffle blindly toward the exit. Outside, the situation was a masterpiece of poetic justice. Malik was standing in the dirt, completely stripped of his designer bravado. When the repossession agents had hooked up his Raptor, my security team had generously handed him a heavy-duty black plastic trash bag so he could retrieve his personal belongings from the cabin before the truck was hauled away. The golden child of the Sterling family, the man who had arrived demanding the keys to my kingdom, was now standing in my driveway, clutching a garbage bag full of gym shoes, loose charging cables, and his completely shattered ego. Chloe was in no better shape. Her phone battery had died while she was screaming at the customer service agent of a private car company that had flatly refused to send a vehicle without a valid, unfrozen credit card on file. She was sobbing hysterically, her expensive mascara running in dark, jagged streaks down her cheeks. When she saw Malik holding the trash bag, the reality of their destitute future completely broke her. She began to hit his chest with her fists, screaming that he had ruined her life. But Malik did not even have the energy to fight back. He just stood there staring blankly at the empty space where his luxury truck used to be. Sheriff Carter stepped out onto the portico, flanked by 2 of her deputies. "Move it along," the sheriff ordered, pointing down the long, winding gravel road that led to the highway. "It is a 2-mile walk to the main road, and I suggest you start marching before I lose my patience entirely." I stood in the doorway, the morning sun warming the emerald fabric of my suit. I watched them take their first pathetic steps down the driveway. Yvette was leaning heavily on Malik, who dragged his trash bag across the pristine white gravel. Chloe trailed behind them, weeping loudly and stumbling awkwardly in her designer heels. They looked exactly like what they were. Frauds who had finally been evicted from a world they did not earn and could no longer afford. Most people would have stayed to watch the entire agonizing walk. Most people would have savored every single second of their enemies trudging 2 miles in the dirt. But I was not most people. Watching them leave implied that I still cared about their existence. The ultimate victory, the absolute peak of my revenge, was total, devastating indifference. I did not stay to watch them fade into the distance. They were no longer relevant to my timeline. I turned my back on the glass doors, officially closing the chapter on the family that had tried to bury me. I adjusted the lapels of my tailored suit, took a deep breath of the fresh coffee-scented air in my lobby, and walked purposefully through the grand hall. I stepped out into the sunlit private courtyard at the center of the resort where a table had been prepared beneath the shade of a massive oak tree. Sitting at the table reviewing a digital portfolio on his tablet was the billionaire technology investor who had witnessed the entire spectacle in the lobby. He looked up as I approached, setting his tablet down. He did not look at me with pity or awkwardness. He looked at me with profound, unmistakable respect. "Good morning, Kendra," he said, standing up to offer a firm handshake. That was an incredibly decisive way to handle a corporate restructuring. I have to say, I am deeply impressed by your operational control. I shook his hand firmly, offering a bright, genuine smile. "Good morning, Marcus. I apologize for the brief interruption to your breakfast. Sometimes clearing the dead weight is necessary to ensure future growth. Shall we discuss the expansion capital for the new wellness pavilions?" He smiled back, taking his seat. "Absolutely. I am ready to invest." I sat down across from him, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The estate was quiet again, humming with the steady, productive energy of a thriving empire. My father had given me a rotting house and a patch of dirt, fully believing I was the only one strong enough to forge a fortune from the ruins. He was right. I took the broken bricks they threw at me and I used them to build an impenetrable fortress. And when they finally came to take it from me, I did not just defeat them. I buried my enemies deep beneath the foundation of my empire, and I never looked back. The core lesson from Kendra's journey is about knowing your own worth and not letting a toxic environment define your future. Blood does not automatically equal loyalty. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones holding you back. Instead of seeking validation from those who continuously belittle your efforts, channel that energy into building your own independence and success. True power comes from quiet resilience, establishing strict boundaries, and letting your undeniable achievements speak for themselves. When you construct a solid foundation based on your own merits, no one can ever tear down your empire. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to protect your peace and build your own empire, hit the like button, subscribe, and share your triumph in the comments below.